What logically follows is the question, must respect for another person be earned? That's really the nub of it. Must the respect for another person be earned? If that's the case, then what happens to our first UU principle that calls for unconditional respect due to just a blanket all human beings? In our guts, we may want to add a footnote to our first principle. Well, there are exceptions. White supremacists, for example, have not and cannot earn my respect. No way. The way this moral injunction to respect the dignity of all people really works in society is that we grant this respect to everyone who is civilized or decent. In other words, this respect has to be earned. When you and I herald the human dignity of all people, like in our first principle, don't we really just have the oppressed people in mind? We want justice to prevail by respecting the dignity of those who have been denied this dignity because of skin color, sexual orientation, nationality, whatever. But if pushed, we would most likely acknowledge that we subscribe to the concept that some people can justifiably be excluded, like Timothy McVeigh, the Boston Marathon bomber, Osama bin Laden, whoever. I'm talking about all who have become expendable by doing something to forfeit their status as deserving dignity, respect, and worth. Some people, we mostly believe, are devoid of this independent value afforded to all human beings. We do not recognize them as a person, but frankly as an object, an animal, whatever. So the way it really works in the world is a form of conditional respect. I will respect you if you are yourself respectful. I will treat you with decency if you are decent. Now, it's easy to imagine how this civil conduct based on condition can easily form a mindset where war becomes very possible or even expected. The deal is, I will not harm you if you are not perceived as harmful. The rationale for this point of view argues that, it is plenty egalitarian, not harming most people, but it does not apply to those who have acted in reprehensible ways. The war mentality is summarized in Freud's version of the Golden Rule: do unto others as they have done unto you. Civilization and its discontent. It's hard to live up to those ethical principles where we are not permitted to choose whom to respect. It's hard to live up to, loving our neighbor regardless of how we view their moral standing. Can we here this morning honestly accept that as our moral precept? Now, I know this is hard because instinctively, perhaps, we cannot imagine recognizing the inherent humanity of a person perpetrating evil. But we need to understand that the injunction that we apply unconditional respect for all people does not imply that we show sympathy towards hardened criminals. It does not imply moral equivalence between victim and perpetrator. We are not talking bleeding heart liberals here. The ethicist will underscore that respect can be compatible with punishment, The caveat, as long as it is assigned and exercised by those who have overcome all hate and desire for revenge, and whose own judgment has not been perverted by ignoring the log in their own eyes. Affirming human value inside every person does not deny the existence of evil. Rather, it is in the face of evil that we are compelled to act with love. Now, I honestly don't think that I am so ethically developed myself. I mean, I struggle very much to affirm the inherent humanness within all, especially when human rights have been violated. But I also realize that I am making the respect for others conditional. I'm playing right into the hands of a mentality that can justify war. Punishing the evildoer, that's what it's all about. Punishing the evildoer cannot include death or maiming or torturing. I think that was made clear in our reading this morning. We need to protect the human community. That's what it's all about. There can't be any killing. Applying the inherent worth and dignity of all people means refusing to reduce people as less than human status. This is the injunction framed by Kant at the beginning this morning. No one is to be treated as having subhuman status. Intellectually, we get it. Emotionally, it's a challenge. By making respect for humanity unconditional, it becomes impossible to believe that another person can be so worthless as to deserve to die. But once we make exceptions, as we are inclined to do, the killing of a professed enemy becomes an easy act to pursue because the enemy has been delegated to subhuman status and therefore is expendable, can die. We can kill him or her. And closer to home, we hear comments expressed not only by the Tea Party and the followers, but we hear things all the time that not all people deserve respect for their humanity. We hear mentioned phrases like the undeserving poor, immigrants, people with AIDS. There's a litany of undesirables. Liberals, most of us here profess that is wrong. We all have an inherent worth and dignity, but we're still only considering the victims. Until we extend the ethical principle that applies the respect and dignity to all people, without exception, we will remain an uncivilized nation. And the prospects for war will always exist on the horizon as long as we withhold respect for everyone. Once a people are considered unworthy in receiving any respect as human beings, unworthy of our concern, unworthy because they have not earned our respect, it becomes too easy then to view them as objects, to be treated as means rather than an end, which is what makes war even possible. Until we believe that human dignity is a given, applies to everyone, we are going to be in trouble, as I am right here. Let me backtrack a second because somebody has shuffled my papers. If I didn't notice it, I'm sure you didn't either. Let me just pick up on a couple of important points, and that is, the notion of do unto others as they have do unto you is a view that is quite common amongst liberals and conservatives alike, namely that not all people are really good deep down inside. And it's really quite understandable to feel this way. Why should aggressors be entitled to dignity or be ascribed any worth? It publicly affirms that evildoing is reprehensible and ought to be punished. That's pretty much how it works. But I would be remiss if I didn't pick at your conscience a little and ask, is this what we want the moral bottom line to be? Or do we cite another example of kind of a spiritual altruism, as we refer to in our reading this morning on the Good Samaritan? That story provides a model that claims being neighbor is not contingent on the recipient's merit or virtue. The Good Samaritan did not verify the victim's moral standing before offering assistance. On the contrary, it was a perfect illustration of our first principle. No questions were asked, affirming the belief and commitment to the worth and dignity of all people. But perhaps, that Good Samaritan story is just too easy an example, because we can easily imagine the fallen man by the roadside. We see him as a victim, an innocent victim of some reprehensible act. And I think we've already demonstrated our eagerness to raise the victim up to an equal moral human status. Of course, the fallen man by the roadside deserves respect and fortunately receives it from the Samaritan. But where do our sympathies fall if we ask, what if the man on the side of the road had been a murderous robber and somehow his crime got botched and he was just laying there a mess? Should not the Good Samaritan leave him where he found him to reinforce a badly needed lesson? That's the way we operate it these days. On some level, we assume that some people simply do not deserve to be treated on the basis of the Golden Rule. And when people act viciously, it undermines their human dignity. They do not possess equal moral worth. Christian ethics, as Stephen Pope points out, goes even further than the Golden Rule. Jesus' disciples were commanded not to retaliate, not to return evil with evil, not to exact revenge, not to hate enemies, but to love and actively do good to those who did not love them, indeed do good to those who even hated them. These attitudes depended neither on some prior action by others or calibrating their moral worthiness in order to receive unconditional love. In fact, the moral force driving the loving actions of these disciples was directed at those who did not merit such treatment at all. So once people are considered unworthy in receiving any respect as human beings, unworthy of our concern, unworthy because they have not earned our respect, it becomes too easy to view them as objects and to be treated as means rather than an end. Until we believe that human dignity is a given, that's the rock bottom moral line. There is human dignity in every person, no exceptions. Until we can get to that place, until we understand that rule applies to everyone unconditionally, which means respect does not have to be earned. Until we reach that ethical level in our lives, adopt that in our living, unless we're able to do that, war will always rule the earth, and our children will be sacrificed. So be it.